All right, so one of our questions from the Discord community asks, I've heard Ian talk about recording his interviews. Is that legal? Should I tell my interviewer that I'm recording? What are the benefits to recording those conversations? I did a job hunt about a year ago. I started last October, November in 2021 to start a job hunt of my own. Decided it was time to change jobs. And I interviewed for a few roles. And as part of that, I've got a little digital audio recorder and I was recording the conversations. I didn't tell the interviewers that I was recording it because I was using it for my own purpose and I don't post those online anywhere. There are legalities to pay attention to though when you're recording conversations. Here in Colorado, it's what we call a single party consent state, which basically means only one person participating in that conversation has to know that the conversation is being recorded. Now, I tell people that I do mentoring with all the time. It's like, if you ever want to record a conversation that we have while I'm mentoring you, like, you have my permission to record at any time. Most interviewers will feel a little bit uneasy if you tell them that you're recording the conversation. But depending on where you live, I think there are only about a dozen states in the United States where you have to get explicit permission from everybody on the call saying like, hey, I want to record this conversation. Is that all right? For me, though, I was using it as kind of a reflection on, like, as soon as the interview was over, I was going back and I was listening to it so I could type up notes about how I think I did. Was there anything, better that I could have done? Did I answer things clearly? And so it was for my own use. Part of what I had intended to do with those questions, and I said this several times, is, hey, I want to go back and I actually want to extract from those conversations. Like, these were some of the questions that I asked during the interview as a candidate. These are some questions that I asked of them, or this is questions that I came up with while we were having conversation. And I thought that would have been helpful. I ended up destroying the recordings because, again, it was just for my own use, and then I deleted them all. And I decided, you know what, there's like hours and hours of conversation in there, and I didn't feel like going back and listening to them again. In retrospect, I should have written down, like, these were the questions that I asked. But while I was doing the interviews, I was taking notes. So I was typing up notes, but I also knew that if I had missed anything, that I had an audio recording of it. Is it a good idea to tell the interviewer that you're recording? Yeah, I think it's a good idea to, but there are legalities as to whether you have to. So again, in Colorado, because it's considered a single party consent state for recording, I didn't have to give the other person notice that I was recording a conversation. Because again, it was just for my own use. When it was over, I discarded the recording, so there's no copy of it anywhere. I wasn't publishing them online, but it was really good for me to kind of go back and reflect. And I think that it's a good opportunity to go back and listen in on, how did I do on that interview? Like, did I say anything that was a little weird? Did I say too many times? Like, I know I say all the time. Or the word like. All the time. I say it all the time. So going back and listening to those conversations, I would listen to that and say, wow, I said about 100 times in that conversation. Or I would say the word like 1,000 times in that conversation. So it was good for me to reflect on, just to know how I could improve for the next phone call. It also helped me go back and write up notes about what did that individual say about how big they want to grow their team, or what their plan is for the year, or to record conversation about, us talking about compensation. And so what I would do after those calls is I was sending an email saying, by the way, just as a recap, this is what we said on the call. You said this, you said this. Is that accurate? I knew it was accurate because I had an audio recording of it, but I would always kind of put it in writing and say, can you let me know if this is accurate? If it's not accurate, can you correct my understanding of this conversation? And most of the time they would come back and say, like, yeah, that was fine. A couple of times they just didn't respond. Like, it's not that they were coming back saying, no, I never said that. This is what I said. But when I did hear back, and it was usually from the recruiters, like, hey, just FYI, while we were on that call, I was writing out some notes. This is what you said about comp range. Is that accurate? And they would write back and say, yeah, that was correct. So it was really helpful just to kind of have like something in writing. Because again, if you don't tell them that you're recording, then then having something in writing where they have acknowledged that yes, this is what we're saying. It's important to have just from a records point of view, so that later on, if they make you an offer and it's drastically different, you can say, hey, by the way, that conversation that we had, I've got an email from you that said blah, blah, blah. But if I went back and say, hey, I've got an audio recording where you said blah, 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 then they'd be like, okay, that's weird. You didn't tell us you were recording. So, should you tell them that you're recording? You can tell them. If you're in one of a dozen states, you have to tell them that you're recording. Sometimes on Zoom, it'll be like, hey, do you mind if we record this on Zoom? Or can I record this on my computer on Zoom? Would that be okay? And so you can ask the interviewer if you can record it and just say, this is just for my own reflection. I'm not going to post it anywhere. I'll sign a non-disclosure or anything like that if you want. I just use it for my own review. I think it's helpful to tell them that, but depending on where you live, you don't have to tell them. Again, there's only about a dozen states in the United States where it is all party consent, which means everybody has to agree for you to do a recording. Otherwise, you can get into like wiretapping laws and things like that, where you can go to jail for it. If anyone was around in the 90s and the whole Bill Clinton thing where people were like taping phone calls and so on, you'll learn all about wiretapping laws. But yeah, so I think to kind of go back to the question of, is it legal? Should I tell my interviewer that I'm recording? What are the benefits? Again, yes, you should tell them. You don't have to tell them though if you're in a single party state. The benefits are really just for reflection and making sure that you have good notes about things that you talked about. I used a lot of those notes that I was typing during the conversation, but then also going back and listening to the conversation about how I wanted to address the next phone call. Like if they progressed on to the next stage of the interview, I had better notes written down and I had better questions because I could spend time reflecting on what was said, what they said, what I asked. So the next phone call, I could be even better. And based on that, I very rarely did not progress to the next interview stage. I think of the 30 companies, there were only a couple where they called back and said like, hey, we're not going to move forward. I want to say there were only like 1 or 2 of those out of all 30 companies. Everyone else was like, we want to keep talking. Like, you're really well organized. You take really good notes. We're having really good conversation. Because the next conversation had to be even better because I was taking notes and I was recording these things and going back and listening to them and making even more accurate notes and coming up with even better questions for the next time I would talk to them on the phone. And so it's a really good way of staying organized. So is it beneficial? Absolutely. Is it legal? In Colorado, it is for me. Check your laws where you live. You can also just do a Google search of single party recording consent kind of thing, and you'll see a list. There are like 11 or 12 states where you have to have like everybody agree.